Hi, this is Paul Bennett, author of the Heir to the Crown series and my new series, The Frozen Flame, and I'm here today to do another Facebook Live, answer some questions, and let you know what's going on in my world of writing. We'll start off with the first thing, exciting news. We have Burden of the Crown, the newest book in the Heir to the Crown series. This is now book 6. And this is already live in print and will go live in electronic form on the 30th of this month. So that's only 2 weeks away, less than 2 weeks away. So pretty excited about that. This is actually the first time we've managed to get the print version out before the electronic version. So that's always good news. And I had a lot of fun writing that. It's a very different sort of a tale, and yet it still deals with all the characters that people have come to love and accept. The other exciting news is my second series has started, and this is the first book in the series called Ashes. Same world, different location, different characters. This one has a lot more magic. In fact, the main story deals with 2 mages, a fire mage and a water mage, and their adventures. So I'm very excited about that. And actually, I finished writing this some time ago, and it was going through the editing stage. So in actual fact, I've almost finished the second book in this series, and that'll be done Monday, Tuesday. I just got the epilogue to write and the last little bit in the last chapter. So that's pretty exciting news. We also have, this is just like Christmas, Christmas in October, the large print edition of first 3 books. This one's Servant of the Crown. We also have Sword of the Crown and Heart of the Crown. And as you can see, it's very large print, so it's nice and easy to read. It's a pretty hefty tome, though. And you can also use it for exercising if you feel you need to work out a little bit. So we have that available too. So I have some questions here I wanted to talk about. I'll get to those shortly. But I do have some other upcoming news. I have a book signing coming up on November the 2nd between 11 and 3 o'clock, and that's at Chapters South in London, Ontario, obviously. We're not in England here, so don't go running down to your local bookstore if you live in England. So that's pretty exciting. We've done that before, and it's always interesting to meet, fun and interesting to meet people that like the series and meet potential new readers. As well, and we'll have a full slate of books there for sale as well. I want to talk a little bit today about my writing process because I know a lot of people online. I belong to numerous Facebook groups about writing and so on. A lot of people want to know, how do you write? And there's no one way to write. Let me make that clear first of all. Everybody has their own way of writing, so I'm going to talk about how I write, what my process is. Maybe this works for you, maybe it doesn't. First of all, there are 2 general principles, or 2 general types of authors. There are, the terms may vary, but we usually refer to them as pantsers and plotters. Pantsers write by the seat of their pants. They make it up as they go along. Plotters, on the other hand, they will plot out the entire story, or at least a large portion of the story. And that's what I do. I used to be a pantser. I started numerous stories, got halfway through them, and I didn't know where they were going. So when it came time to write Servant of the Crown, I decided to plot the whole thing out. And so if we can just swivel the camera over here, I'm just going to show you. This is my monitor. Over here. These other monitors, my wife gets 3 monitors, I just have the one. That's all I need. So I'm going to talk, let me just change to my computer glasses here. And as an example, I'm going to talk about book 3, Heart of the Crown. So there might be a few spoilers here. I'm not going to try to give away too much of the plot. But when I'm starting the idea of a book, I always start with a basic outline in point form. And this is just a 1-page synopsis. And in fact, this one is so old, the names have all changed. The names of the kingdoms changed. Even some of the character names were different. Can you see that okay? Okay. Just make sure that's visible. So this is 1 page. It talks about being at court. They introduce a character named Ulrich. It's explaining the background details, not necessarily things that come out immediately. For example, here it explains that relations with Merceria are not going very well. Although in this note it's called Mercia because I didn't change the name yet. Someone has been traveling around from Merceria asking for help, and that of course is how Heart of the Crown begins. Now in the original outline here I have notes on Ulrich's personality. He's a very big part of it, and the book is divided into 3 sections. I think of 3 acts when I'm writing. The first act of course is being introduced to the characters. The second act, they travel west. Some things happen without giving the plot away. And the third act, things really get ramped up, lots more action, and so on. So from this, I then go on to the next step, which is to proceed with a detailed outline. Now, for Heart of the Crown, I did this on an act-by-act basis. So I have a detailed outline for Act 1, Act 2, and Act 3. So I have here, let's see, this one is Act 1, I believe. There we go. So I basically had 3 parts to the story. The first part is dealing with meeting the people from Westland, learning, seeing the cultures clash, and of course learning that there is something else going on. I won't give away the plot, but it's very important. They can't trust everyone that's in their group. The second part deals with their trip to Lorengard, and all the events that occur there, and that really gives us a peek into the characters. I'll talk more about characters a bit later. And then the last part is the actual attack and the big battle, of course, that finishes off the book. Now when I do this, you'll notice, I don't know if you can see too well here, everything's grayed out. That's because as I write the chapter, I gray out the previous chapter so it's easy to go to what I'm looking for. Now this is a 24-page outline, and this only outlines Act 1. In fact, if I scroll way to the bottom, oh, where is it? There we go. Oh, actually, sorry, this one, yeah, this one, there's chapter 15, 16, and then it just says Part 2, quick blurb, Part 3, quick blurb, and then that's detailed out on the next page. So it's important when I'm considering writing a book, I already know roughly how long I want the book to be, and I have to make sure there's enough to fill out the chapters. I can't, you know, I don't want to write a book and get halfway through it and suddenly I'm at the end of the story. So that's why I find plotting really works for me. But once again, everyone's different. You know, other people can write off the top of their head, and I should qualify that. I do a lot of scenes, and sometimes I add a whole chapter off the top of my head, but the original outline gives me a framework. I guess framework is perhaps the best expression. So if I flip over here now, this is the Act 2 layout here, and once again I've got another 20 pages detailing out all the stuff. And when I'm doing this, I may even have dialogue in here. I won't worry about punctuation or anything, it's just point form, but if there's something I want somebody to say, it'll be in there. One of the hardest parts, of course, is you want your character to make a great speech. I have a scene where in Heart of the Crown where Ulrich is getting ready to lead his men into battle, and he has to say something, you know, epic. You know, if you think back to Lord of the Rings or any movie like that, they always have something really interesting to say to inspire their troops and so on. So that can sometimes be challenging. Sometimes you write it, then you read it back and you think, yeah, that's not really all that exciting. So that sometimes requires a lot of tweaking. Of course, I couldn't do any of this without maps, and this is, you can see up here actually, I'm causing Carol to run around a lot with the camera. So these are my working maps here. This is actually, for those who are up on the series, these are the earlier books because some things change in Merceria in the later books. I won't say exactly what it is for those who haven't read, but the map does change. And then here's Weldwin. This is actually an old map. We have a typo on the label here that we fixed later on. And this is the map from the Frozen Flame. This is very much a zoomed out map. And you'll notice there's not much detail, which is intentional. The idea is that as the books develop, you'll see more detail added. That way we're not giving the whole game away. Over here you can see Krieghoff and Holstead. They play a big part in the first two books. Won't give too much about the second book away, but this is actually, of course, where the two main characters meet, in the city of Drayborn. We have Karslev, which is where Natalia is from in the Ashes book. And right on the border, you can't see it here, but there's two little dots. And in the book, we have that blown up to a larger scale. And that's where Athelwald is the village of Athgar, and Ord Kurgad is where the orcs live. And they're essential to that particular part of the storyline. I also have up on the wall here notes. These are, well, there's all kinds here. Let's see. I have, when I was writing Ashes, I had so many orcs to keep track of, and so I decided I needed a master list. So I could have put it on my screen, but then, you know, I've got so many other things open with my outline and my writing, so I thought I would print that up. Then we've got the nobility, both of Weldwin and Merceria, and you'll notice they're labeled because, of course, this changes. People die, other people come in, and so on. There's the nobility of Weldwin. I've got a couple in red just to help them stand out a bit more, because there's a dwarf, an elf, and a couple of women on there, and I just wanted to be able to pick them out quickly for story purposes. Over here we have the mages that appear in the different stories, and then if you go up, I just got a quick list of the mages in Merceria. I needed that for the work on Burden of the Crown, actually. And then this is this list is out of date. This is something called the Stormwind Sartellian line, and this plays a very important part in the Frozen Flame series. Of course, this list is already out of date, and actually we changed some of the names. We had too many names starting with the same letter, and so we had to change that, or I had to change that, so there'd be no confusion. And of course, I've got book covers here on the wall. We're a little out of date, though. We actually have to get some of the new ones put up. But those are kind of nice and inspiring to see. Let's grab some water here. All right, so what have I been doing lately? Well, I've been working on Embers, and Embers, as I said, is the second book in the Frozen Flame series. And it continues the adventures of Athgar and Natalia. So Athgar is a fire mage. He's trained to use the elemental forces of fire, and Natalia is a water mage. Now, developing Natalia was interesting because on the one hand, she can use water, and of course that includes ice, but I didn't want her to come across like some Disney animated feature. So I had to be very careful with how she uses her magic. And also it can be challenging to come up with new ways and new approaches to using some of these concepts. And there's a scene in Ashes where basically, they get into a fight at sea with some, well, we'll just call them pirates for lack of a better term. And Natalia uses her spells in a sort of an interesting way, and in perhaps a way that people wouldn't normally think of. That actually came about because of a role-playing game we were in. My wife was playing a water mage, and she came up with some very interesting techniques. So I thought, this is cool, I'm going to borrow this and put that in the story. So that was very cool. Let's see. I can't really tell you too much about the second book without kind of ruining the first book, but let's just say the orcs make a return. I have a lot of fun writing them. They have an interesting culture, I think. And developing their culture was, I think, I found it challenging, but also rewarding. I wanted to have a race that was relatively known. People have heard of orcs. You know, they're a pretty common trope in fantasy, but they're sort of flipped on their end. So they're not evil Lord of the Rings orcs. They're more of a sort of a, well, I wouldn't say primitive. Their society is certainly not primitive, but they don't have the technology, let's say, of the other races. They don't wear heavy armor. Their tools are a little cruder, and so on. But they have a fully developed society. Their approach to magic is very different than the human approach. And one of the things I tried to do in Ashes was show the difference between the way the orcs deal with magic and the way that humans deal with magic. So you have this back and forth between Athgar's background and Natalia's background. Natalia, of course, goes to something called the Volsturm, which is an academy where she's taught by other mages, and Athgar is taught by the orcs. That's not really a surprise, that you can probably figure that much out just from reading the jacket cover. So I wanted to show how different they were. So there's a lot of sort of parallels. And that comes in later when they finally meet. There is some, I guess, friction, a little bit of friction in terms of their approach to how they handle spells and so on. The magic system that I use is actually one that I developed for a role-playing game, and that helps me define what can and cannot be done, magically speaking. I've always disliked the idea that magic was all-powerful, that magic could do anything. And I think it's much more interesting when magic has limitations. And so in this system, magic is very deadly against an individual, but you cannot wipe out entire armies using magic. It's just not that powerful. And it draws from your inner power, which leads to some interesting situations in the second book of the series. And by the way, this is the same magic system that is used in Heir to the Crown. For those that have read Heart of the Crown, there's a scene in that, I won't give too much away, but Lady Aubrey, who is a budding life mage, healer, she is healing injured people, and she starts to bleed from the nose, I believe it is, and it's because she has expended all her energy, and now she's consuming her physical form in order to flow her magic. And so the same thing happens with any mage. If they use up too much energy, their body begins to become consumed, and they take damage. And that also becomes very important. It puts a limitation on how much magic somebody can do. And yet, if they were in a life and death struggle, they could conceivably go too far and possibly kill themselves or injure themselves in an effort to, do a final attack or something along those lines. So I have that as a sort of a dramatic thing that I can do with the characters. Not all the characters in the Frozen Flame are magical. The two main ones are, certainly. And of course, if you're going to have some magical heroes, you got to have some magical villains. But there's lots of other people that are just regular people. They're maybe warriors. One of them is in the second one is actually more of a diplomat or a merchant. In the first book, of course, there's a brother of one of the temple orders. And that also is a lot of work that I did developing a new religious system. I wanted the different cultures to have different beliefs. In Heir to the Crown, there is a pantheon of gods. In Merceria, they worship Saxnor, who's the god of strength. But they still believe the other gods exist. When they go to what they call Westland, the actual name of the kingdom, of course, is Weldwin, they find that they're more about worshiping Malin, the goddess of wisdom. Even though it's the same pantheon, they have a different primary god. When you flip over to the orcs, in either story, because there are orcs in Heir to the Crown, they worship their ancestors. So they still believe that the gods exist. They have their own origin story based on the god of fire. But they believe that their destiny, their fate, whatever is rolled up with their ancestors. And of course, they are very powerful life mages. They can communicate with spirits. So that kind of makes more sense. We also get a brief introduction in Heir to the Crown of something called the Church of the Saints. In fact, the Carathians worship the saints. In the book Ashes, you find that most of the continent worships the saints. And the Church of the Saints is very interesting. Developing it, I didn't want someone to just worship a deity. So the idea is that there were 6 unique individuals that banded together, and because of what happened to them, they formed, or what became, a church. Originally, it was just a group banding together to protect the holy city of Harani, and it's called the Holy City because they believe that's where humans first developed, or that was like the first civilization. Of course, like real history, nobody knows for sure. And I wanted to make sure that that was realistic. And in a lot of books, it's all cut and dried. But in real life, things aren't cut and dried. You don't really know the true story. I, as the author, know the true story, of course, but I'm not telling. And different people will have different opinions about what something means. The Church of the Saints is broken into 6 religious orders, each worshiping one of the saints. And they were human, and everybody who worships them know they were human. They're not really worshiping the saint per se, they're worshiping the beliefs of the saint, right? So that kind of colors the way things happen. What's interesting in the Ashes series is that Athgar worships the old gods, Natalia really worships the saints, and of course the orcs worship the ancestors. So it's interesting to see the different way that people maybe invoke their names, or just look at things in general. There's a very different concept there. So that was a very, very specific thing that I did in the books, and I have more to develop. I have so much more to tell about the church and various other aspects that I'm already looking at another series that will delve into more of the politics of the church. You sort of get a hint for that in Ashes and Embers. But in Ashes, you meet someone named Brother Sarek. And Brother Sarek is, he's a temple knight of St. Matthew. St. Matthew is dedicated to helping the poor and the sick. And so he spends a lot of time in small missions in the big cities helping the sick and the injured and so on. But he's also kind of an investigator for the church. So he has a very unique background. I've actually written a short story, which I have to edit and make available at some point, called Into the Maelstrom. And it basically tells about how he became a temple knight. Not how he became a brother of the order. He was just a lay brother, a non-warrior, if you like. But it gives a very good idea of his gumption, I guess, if you want to use that term. He, of course, features in the book Ashes in a very important way. He's very central to the story there, even though the story is about Athgar and Natalia. So he'll be a sort of a spin-off series of short stories, and he's more of an investigator. I've always wanted to write some sort of a mystery fantasy tale, and that could be anything from chasing down a monster to solving a murder, who knows. But that's all stuff that will come later. You also, there's a brief introduction to the Sisters of St. Agnes, which is another order made of women. They're women warriors, and they have an interesting story, which is also going to be its own series eventually. Probably won't get to that until next year. We've got another series in the works. Those who follow the newsletter or have checked online, I think it's up on the website. Did we put that on the website? Yeah, we did. So there's another series I've already started outlining. I've got a couple of stories. I've got rough outlines, the sort of one paragraph outline for 6 stories. Usually they grow. So, by the way, I mentioned this before. The Heir to the Crown series is eventually planning to be 15 books total, not including the short stories, of course. But each set of 5 books will be a complete story. Same characters, continuing on. I was very inspired by the concept. I don't know if you've seen the movie Elizabeth with Kate Blanchett. She did a second one. I think it was called The Golden Years or something. So the idea of kind of revisiting the characters when they're older is very fascinating. And so I'm looking forward to writing that, although I've still got lots more to do in books 7, 8, 9, and 10. I've got lots of stuff happening. I don't have a shortage of stories, that's for sure. Let's see, what else can we talk about? Don't want to give away too much. Creating characters, let's talk about that a little bit. I hit on this on my last Facebook Live. To me, characters are important. They have to control the story. The story can't control them. Certainly events can overtake them, but ultimately I think what makes a story interesting is that the decisions of the characters affect the outcome. And a recurring theme in Heir to the Crown is that all these people are working together. It's a team effort. There isn't one person solving everything. It's because of the characters and their relationships with each other that things work. In Burden of the Crown, there's a very crucial moment where things could go completely south. Won't give away the story, but I had fun writing it, and it makes you think how slender that thread is that holds everything together. And yet, in the end, it's all the people around Anna that help her make it through and help the kingdom recover. So that's a very central theme. In Ashes, I wanted to scale it down a little bit. So Ashes, it's a couple. And the whole concept of the couple is that together they are greater than the sum of their parts. Individually, okay, Natalia's maybe a little more powerful magically. Athgar's no slouch in that department, but when you put them together, they are much more powerful. They're much more effective in doing what they do. The first book, you get a little bit of that. The second book, it becomes a little clearer. That together they are this powerful force, and so that's fun writing that too. And of course, that's going to be explored in more detail going on. I already have plans for more books there. The original Frozen Flame series was going to be 6 books, but I think it's probably going to be more like 8 books. And I won't stretch it. If it won't go 8, I won't do 8, but. Just from the outlines that I already have in mind, it looks like it's going to be more about 8 books. The first 4 books deal a little bit more with Athgar's background, but the last 4 books deal much more with Natalia's background. You have to kind of build up to that one, though, because you kind of have to learn a bit more about her family. The family. Someone compared it to the mob. I guess it's kind of like that, but not quite. And so, yeah, it's that becomes a much bigger player, and of course the story ramps up as you go. So, in the first book, it's really more about just finding who did something. The second book, it's a little more dangerous, a little more is at stake. That builds up as the storyline progresses. So I had a lot of fun writing that, and I'm looking forward to starting the next book. But I'm also looking forward to starting on Defender of the Crown. Which is the next book to come out after Burden. And this one returns to Merceria and deals with some events that have been put into motion in Burden of the Crown. Well, I see that's been about half an hour, so I guess that's long enough for today. Just a quick reminder, once again, Burden of the Crown is live in paperback. The ebook version is available on the 30th of October. And I have a book signing on November 2nd. That's a Saturday from 11 till 3, London Chapters South. That's the one on Wellington Road for those that are in those areas. Pardon?
In Canada.
In Canada, yes, that's right. In Canada. London, Canada, not London, UK. I don't think there'd be a chapters in London, UK, but you never know. There's bookstores all over the place. So that's it for now. We'll sign off, and we'll see you next time.